You know, you get to this point in the season in December and you're kind of looking back and you're thinking, man, I didn't see a lot of deer. And there's reasons for that. I think the more we play the blame game, we blame our neighbors, we blame the DNR, we blame poachers, whatever the reason, we blame predators. Wolves, yes. Right when I was saying predators, Dylan's putting the wolves out. And I saw that in the UP a lot. Well, we're not seeing deer because of the wolves, because of the sugar beaters, because of the trolls, downstaters coming up from below the bridge, the Mackinac Bridge. But always blaming someone else. And on private land, you have total control. It's easy to control deer numbers, much easier than you think, either higher or lower on your land. And there's some risks for that. The more deer you have, the more you attract, the more does you have, the less bucks you have once you get to a certain tipping point. Like, you should have a balance of does on your property, whatever that number is, based on your habitat, the type of cover you have, amount of food. And once you go over that, as you start to go too much over that, the number of bucks that you can expect within that balance goes down. So you can take a property and make it almost completely daylight of does and fawns and void of bucks except after night, dark, especially when it's breeding time after dark, because those bucks will come in, and because there's so many does and fawns around, they don't want to stay on that property. Interesting, we have a mature buck we're after on the property right now, still in December, and his name's Bo. We've watched him for a few years now, and Bo has been in a certain area, and it seems every time we see him in there, he's with a doe. And Dylan and I watched him with a doe the one night in there. He'd been there in the morning, the evening, and daylight, and then he was there with that doe. And I think those mature bucks, he goes to a spot like that because he can have a place he calls own and hang out with a doe. It's almost like they herd that doe that they're breeding into that spot so they can have that doe to themselves for a day or two and then breed that doe and go, because they don't want other mature bucks coming in, so they're not hanging out in those areas. But it's interesting to see. I don't know if there's a lot of truth to that, but I've seen that time and time again. But bottom line is, we want to see more deer. I want you to see more deer. And if you're a public land hunter, it's one thing on private, you can build it. There's things you can do. Tons of control, like I said. But on public, in the spot you're at, maybe you have too many hunters, all of a sudden they moved in. Maybe the habitat's gotten older, so it's not supporting deer, doesn't have food, doesn't have cover. Move. Public land is pretty easy. You just move. Look for fresh sign. Look for pockets of cover. Because on public land, what's different about public and private is, private, you might see someone's social media story and they have lots of deer and they're shooting big bucks. But most people that are good public land hunters aren't going to stop you at the truck and say, hey, if you go about 2 miles down the road, there's a really good pocket of deer over on the east side of the ridge. You just got to go down to this saddle. It's about a 45-minute walk in. Tons of deer. I hunt it all the time. That doesn't happen. You know, it's crazy. I'll come out dragging a deer in Pennsylvania, public land, long trek out, either carried it out after I cut it up or drug it out, get back to the truck. Guarantee you there's people there that'll ask, where did you shoot your buck? And so I always carry paper with me and a pen, and I always draw out a map of exactly where I shot it, and then I give it to them. No, that's bull. I don't do that. And in fact, I'm not very forthcoming with where I shot that deer. Let's just put it that way. Because you want to protect areas of public land. No one's going to tell you where to go, so you have to put some boot time in. Look for diversity of habitat, change of habitat, clear cuts, remote areas, somewhat difficult access to get in, and you'll probably find secluded pockets of deer on public land that you never knew were there because you hunted the same spot all the time and it's changed. The cool answer on public land is just to move. We've talked about it a few times lately. Dylan has about 8 spots in South Dakota where he goes, just on that public land location. He's only been hunting there for 2 years on the public land and for whitetails. And I'm sure by next year, he'll have 12, 15 spots. You have to be mobile. You have to move. You have to find the current deer herd. If you don't find it, move. And that's a great answer on public land. And if you're leasing land, private land, and it's just a dud property, you're not seeing much, you don't have much control over food plots or habitat, try a different piece. Don't get discouraged. I see people that are in the comments will say, I just had a bad year on public land. I'm never hunting again. I'm hanging it up. Well, it tells me that their level of passion for whitetails is not very high, because they'd probably go find deer herds if they were. They'd change something, but they're just giving up. I'm not a give up type of person, and I hope you aren't either. But sometimes it takes moving. Private land, food. Food rules the roost when it comes to private land. If you don't have good food, someone else will. And that doesn't mean you have to have a giant tractor and combine or tractor or grain drill that costs $70,000. What it means is you just have to have good food. And a lot of times, it's not the best food that attracts most deer. It's the best food with the least amount of hunting pressure. So your neighbor might plant couple dozen acres of corn and beans and greens. But if they sit in a beautiful redneck blind right in the middle of it and spook all the deer, then it's just going to become a nighttime nocturnal parcel, and that means you have more opportunity on your land to actually hold them during the daylight with a lot less food. Bottom line is you're not going to hold them on your property if they're not relating to that property on a daily basis during the daylight if you don't have food. Now you have to have cover, but it doesn't take a lot of good cover. You know, that's why I put it down here, improve bedding cover at number 4. It's not as much of a priority because if you don't have food, doesn't matter how great your bedding cover is, they're not going to be there. The flip side, like I said, if you have great bedding cover but you don't have food, they're not going to be there. Deer need to feed 5 times in a 24-hour period. That means 3 times during the daylight, right before dark, early morning, and then midday. And so they have to have browse. That means they have to have regeneration, diversity back in their bedding areas. You have to have that, but they'll forgive that a little bit if they have secluded cover. But they have to have that number 3 feeding in the day, that high quality food source. And it's almost like a little bit of a competition thing, because if your neighbor has great food and they don't hunt much, then you're probably not going to see a lot of deer if you don't have some kind of quality food source. Food is critical. That's why looking at land to lease, I wouldn't lease a piece unless I put food plots on there. And food plots can be done with a hand spreader. That's how we do it. An ATV sprayer or backpack sprayer. You don't need a lot of equipment. You don't even need discs or drags. You can do all this no-till, which is what we teach in our food plots. Most of the seed I sell within my food plot business, WHS Wildlife Blends, is a variety of some type of seed that you can throw on the ground. You need minimal tillage. You still improve the soil. We talk about how to do that. We talk about that's what I've been doing for 20 years. But it's really easy to do over 20 years. And in saying that, I just mentioned food plots real quick. March 1st is when we will release our full lineup of food plot seeds. So we'll start talking about that a lot in January and February coming up. But bottom line is you have to have food on your property and even on public land. You want to find deer, find diversity, find the best food source. And a lot of times, like Dylan, he shot a nice buck this week out in South Dakota on public land. He was hunting about 150 yards from an ag field. You know, that's that food source that drives that daily movement. Drives the movement. And that leads us into number 3, protect the movement. So you find a movement like Dylan was hunting, or like you should find on public land or create on private land, but you have to protect it. What does it mean to protect it? Don't let the deer know that you're watching them. Don't let them smell you. Don't let them see you. Don't let them hear you. Let me repeat that. Sight, sound, scent. Don't let any one of those 3 factors get to that deer herd, because that line of movement will be non-existent, or it'll just be does and fawns. Even they have a tolerance level. So they'll only take so much before moving on somewhere else. Mature bucks move away just like that. So if you're into mature bucks, you want to see bucks regularly, find a movement, public or private land, build it on private land, find it on public land, and then protect it. When you protect it, great things happen. Really, really good things happen. Private land, public land, find new routes in and out. So you're not going by deer during the daylight in their bedding areas or during the morning in those food areas. Find screening on private land. You can build screening. Switchgrass screening that we use, shrubs, miscanthus grass in areas with high elevation or under wires. We need that higher growth. Conifers. There's a lot of things you can do for screening. On public land, use the ridges. Use conifers to get into stands out, so you're not exposing yourself to your movements. Think about, again, if the deer had guns. I always talk about that. But how would you get in and out of that stand differently if they did have guns and they could shoot back? You know, people don't think about that. They think, oh, I'll just go to my stand and you spook all those deer. You don't have a good hunt. You don't see a lot of deer. But if you can preserve that movement over and over again, you put some boot time in or you build it and you preserve that movement, you're going to see more deer. That's the name of the game right there. Scout well, find good spots, preserve those movements, and you're going to be into the deer every single year, especially if you're flexible on public land or you do it well on private land so that your improvements don't expose your movement. That's what 90% of all deer movements or deer improvements on private land, people run into the problem with. They put so many improvements on their land, they spend a lot of money, now they can't get on and off the property without spooking deer, and that's a very bad thing. And then quality gear, what does that mean? Gear that doesn't make noise. Could be clothing, when you're drawing your bow, when you're moving against a tree. Could be tree stands that are clanging, banging when you're walking up and down that stand. But quality gear will make sure that deer don't hear you, and that is so critical. How many hunts are ruined because you make a noise getting in and out of your stand and deer can hear you 150 yards away? Listen to a friend of yours get in and out of the stand location. You know, wait at the base of this tree. How much noise do they make getting in and out? Are they snapping, banging, using Velcro, making noise getting in and out? Well, that ruins that spot. Just 1 or 2 deer that hear that, they're not coming back. You can see how it's a magnifying effect. You hunt it again, do the same thing over and over again. Now all of a sudden those deer are wise to that location and they avoid it. And they don't avoid it by 20 yards, they avoid it by 200 yards. It's a big difference. That's why you can clear a 40-acre parcel out pretty quick, because it's only 440 yards wide if it's square. So you're in the middle hunting and you spook deer, they're off your land. A deer spook about a half mile when they do run. And I find they relocate by 200-300 yards at least when you do that. Improve bedding cover. You do all this first. Then it comes down improving the cover. Now you can actually hold more deer on the land that relate to the food on your property. You might add adequate cover. You might add decent cover. Deer will put up with adequate cover, but they won't put up with adequate food that's always changing or non-existent. Once you have the food, make sure there's good cover. If you find a good food source on public land, it's pretty easy. Go to the good cover side, that's where the deer are. And if it's a good cover side and there's not any hunting pressure and it relates to good food at the moment, it's different on public land. You're hunting the food source of the moment. Then you're going to find deer. And now you have an assemblage where you have good cover over here. That's for morning stand, sneak into the back side of it, wait for deer to come to you in the morning. Or sit in between the cover and the food, or on the back side of the cover and wait for them to come to you in the afternoon. Now you have an assemblage of stands. Even on public land where you know they're bedding there, they're feeding here. So a lot of times you find that stand of oaks on the property on public land. Where's the good cover around there? Because on public land, they don't cut very often. Not like they're practicing, especially on federal land, it's even worse than state. Find on state land, find that clear cut that might be a quarter mile away, and you can just about bet where those deer are coming from. They're coming from that direction. So private land, again, improve your cover to hold more deer to the food source that you're supporting. It's almost like every acre of cover needs to be supported by some level of quality food. And if not, they're going to go somewhere else on private land. So really look for that relationship of food and cover. Again, that's that line of movement that I talk about that you need to protect. Once you find that line, you can improve it by improving the cover, improving the food. But it all starts with that food. That's what anchors that daylight movement. Every deer is coming to this food source, clear cut on public land, food plot on private. They're coming out of this bedding area, this one, this one, this one, and that represents that bottom of funnel of daylight movement where all the deer are going right there. If you protect these lines, stand locations, if you protect those lines, you protect this core area. What area of that is sanctuary? All of it. On the inside of your stand location, all of it's sanctuary. You should have at least 22 acres to 25 acres of sanctuary on a 40-acre parcel, contiguous, all together. You can get a higher percentage on an 80-acre parcel. I call that your land efficiency, what's working for you. Public land is pretty cool because you can find an area that might be several hundred acres where no one else is entering, and you just need to figure it out where they're bedding, where they're feeding, and then you can hunt in between, hunt in the bedding areas in the morning, hunt food sources in the afternoon, evening, but you can't spook them, you can't let them know you're hunting them. And improving cover is that step. And then once you're hunting, please folks, manage your scent. This is what blows a lot of those deer lines of movement is you have, they're feeding here, they're bedding here. You hunt in between, you get in a good location and you think, it won't matter, I'm using XYZ product that's gonna hide my scent. No, it's not. If you hunt that way, you're not gonna see a lot of deer. You have to manage your scent. When you're on stand, the best form of scent control is stand location, meaning just don't blow your scent towards something. Another thing we do and we're religious about is clean legs, clean boots. We use the limit shield. And I believe it does eliminate our scent. So we're not leaving much of a scent trail in and out. And that's a really good thing because think about that. Think about this right here. Let's say you could park here, you can park here. Well, you're going to stand locations around the outside. You're coming through here, you're going to stand locations around to here, something like that. Well, after a few days of hunting, you leave a spider web of scent all around the outside. So when these deer, they're not just living on 40 acres. Hopefully you have them during the daylight, but then they're leaving. If they hit your scent all over the place, it doesn't matter if they're hitting it here, 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 and they're not hitting it here. Pretty soon they're not in there because they're hitting it outside of that everywhere they go. They're not just going to be confined to 30 acres on 40 acres of cover and never leave that. They're going to leave, and they constantly hit your scent going in and out because you're not controlling the scent on your legs and your boots. We actually mow trails. We actually make sure that we're not brushing up against a bunch of grass and weeds and debris because that all holds scent like a sponge when it hits your legs. So we're very careful about the spiderweb of scent we leave, and that's where we use products like a limit shield to spray down boots, legs, make sure they're clean going in and out. And that's something that after you figure all this out, you either move to find a different spot, you hunt good food sources, or build it on private land, find it on public. You protect the movement of deer. You make sure they can't see you, hear you, or smell you. Also, improve bedding cover or find good bedding cover adjacent to that good food source. Then when you're hunting, you're finding all those good access routes, you're making sure you stay out of the deer, make sure your scent stays out of the deer. And that's probably one of the number one failures that we see with deer hunters is because of some of the phrases out there that you don't need to worry about your scent because you're using this product, it really, really hurts deer hunters. So make sure you manage your scent once you put everything else together, and then you can't help but find more deer. You really can't. And that's our goal for even if you still have some remaining tags and you can still have some remaining weeks to hunt right here and get out, or you're really starting to plan for next year, do these things. And our goal for you is to see a lot more deer next year. And I hope you do, and I hope you do, because that helps retain you in the number of hunters we have. It helps attract more hunters when you're seeing deer and having fun. And my goal for you next year is to start seeing more deer in 2024 and beyond. I urge everyone out there to really check out my web classes. They've been wildly successful. We have one that details how you should design your land, another one that details how you should plant and maintain and manage a food plot program. How can you make those decisions that fit your land specifically and not someone else's? Unfortunately, there's so much information in the hunting industry that says you should do this, but it doesn't apply to you. These web classes directly apply to you. And then we have our third web class that came out last year, our rut web class, navigating the entire rut. And then we have our fourth one coming out, which is hunting hills and thermals. I urge you to check those out, try the web classes, and they're all about teaching, helping you understand how you can navigate, not only managing your property, food plots, and the rut, but also hunting strategically, hills, thermals, and wherever you pursue whitetails for your dream and your passion.